Welcome to Sherlock Mysteries. I'm Jack, the host for today's mystery. We're joining Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings today at the enigmatic Ebon Court chateau in Brittany, with the 7 keys of Ebon Court. Before we begin, I would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from today. Let me know in the comments. Pour yourself some good cognac. Sharpen your small gray cells and prepare for a story of ancient retribution. The 7 Keys of Ebon Court. Chapter 1. A summons to Ebon Court on a gloomy October morning in 1932. The message arrived, plunging my friend Hercule Poirot and me into one of the most difficult cases of our long collaboration. I recall the day vividly because I had been attempting to interest Poirot in the morning paper's story of a particularly perplexing theft in Kensington when his secretary, Miss Lemon, knocked on the door with the fateful yellow letter. "An urgent telegram has arrived for you, Mr. Poirot," she informed with her usual professionalism. My friend's brows raised in that characteristic way as he slit open the telegram with his paper knife, a movement so exact it may have been choreographed. His emerald eyes, those extraordinary orbs that missed nothing, studied the message twice before handing it to me without comment. The cable was brief but compelling, requesting quick aid. Stop the unexplained deaths at Ebon Court Chateau, Brittany. Stop circumstances most peculiar. Stop, your reputation follows you, Inspector Beaumont. French police stop. Sacker, Poirot mumbled, tapping his fingers on the arm of his chair. Hastings Money, what do you think of this summons? It sounds basic enough, I said, but something in Poirot's demeanor suggested otherwise. A death in France requires your specific skills. Precision, but examine, if you please, the unusual choice of word situations, most peculiar. Not suspicious or mysterious, but peculiar. What does this suggest to the trained mind? I confess that I saw nothing particularly remarkable in the language, but Poirot's passion was undeniable. Within 2 hours, we were on the Dover-Calais ferry, and by evening, we were rattling through the Breton countryside in a hired car, our driver navigating by lamplight through an increasingly dense fog. The chateau of Ebon Court loomed from the mist like something from a Gothic romance, a frightening silhouette of gray stone towers and steep slate roofs set abruptly on the cliffs overlooking the untamed Atlantic. Even in the faint light, I could detect the antique aspect of the place, its medieval underpinnings softened by Renaissance additions that spoke of richness and refinement. Monsieur Poirot muttered as our motorcar crunched across the gravel courtyard. Isn't this an ideal setting for a mystery? Our arrival was hailed by Inspector Beaumont, a stocky man in his 40s whose frantic demeanor suggested he had been anticipating our arrival with much worry. He hurried forward as we alighted, his relief clear. "Mu puo, Captain Hastings, thank heaven you've arrived so quickly." His English, although accented, was perfectly serviceable. "I confess that I am absolutely at sea with this romance." "Allo, Inspector." Poirot responded with a small bow. "Perhaps you would be so kind as to inform us about the fact." We were led into the chateau's spectacular entrance hall, a soaring area dominated by a massive stone fireplace and old tapestries. Inspector Beaumont started his account. "The victim is Monsieur Armand Delacroix, age 67, lord of this estate for the last 30 years. His manservant discovered him dead at his desk this morning after locking him in his private study." "Cause of death?" Poirot queried, his piercing vision capturing every bit of our surroundings. "Poison. We believe the local physician suspects strict. 9. But we need confirmation from Rennes. But that's hardly the most interesting element of the case." We had approached the door of the study, and Inspector Beaumont stopped dramatically. Sidioko was found clutching this with his right hand. He presented a little evidence bag containing what seemed to be half of an exquisite brass key, with beautiful scrollwork broken clear through the middle. "Most intriguing," Poirot mumbled as he examined the broken key through the translucent bag. The remaining half was not located, but there was more. The inspector escorted us to an old desk where a black silk envelope lay open next to the body containing these. From the envelope, he carefully extracted 6 more keys, each similar in design to the broken one, but whole. Each had a small parchment tag tied with a black ribbon. Pooh stepped closer. His eyes were bright with interest. "If you please inspect the names on the tags. Madame Evangeline Morrow, Dr. Philipper, Monsieur Jules Bum, is my own elder brother. Miss Catherine Ashworth, Professor Reed Drain, and Monsieur Victor Lamartin. And these persons who are here in residence all arrived yesterday afternoon at Monsieur de Lacqua's invitation. They were supposed to spend the weekend here for what the master dubbed a gathering of old friends and acquaintances." I observed as Poirot's mind began to work on this odd issue. His head tilted at that familiar angle indicating serious concentration. The arrangements for this weekend inspector were long-standing. According to the staff, Né Dokwa sent the invites only a fortnight ago, with the most urgent tone. According to his secretary, each guest was particularly invited to arrive Friday afternoon and remain until Sunday. "Tia Poirot," exclaimed softly, "and the purpose of this gathering." Inspector Beaumont's expression became troubled. "Si Puo is where the situation turns genuinely weird. According to the butler, Mzi Dukwa declared at dinner last evening that he intended to make a revelation that would illuminate certain betrayals in the past. His exact words, according to various witnesses, and the reaction of his guests to this news mixed, one might say. Several appeared uncomfortable, but whether from guilt or simply embarrassment at their host's dramatic manner, I cannot determine." Puo nodded slowly, returning his focus to the 7 keys, 6 of which were whole and 1 damaged. "These keys, Inspector, unlock what Nisi Poo has not yet determined. They appear to be fairly old, possibly antique, and of a design unknown to the home personnel." As if beckoned by our conversation, an elderly man in butler's livery emerged at the study door. His dignified bearing only slightly affected by the evening's tragic occurrences. "Forgive the interruption, Inspector," he replied with grave respect. "The guests are becoming very worried. Several have inquired about departing for Paris this evening." Nam Poirot interjected abruptly. "That is not permissible, Inspector." "Surely. You haven't let anyone depart." "Certainly not. This is now a murder investigation, and everyone here is a potential witness or suspect." The butler cleared his throat gently. "If I may, gentlemen, the guests have congregated in the grand salon. They are quite keen to grasp the situation." Poirot fixed his jacket with remarkable accuracy and adjusted his tie. Then Nizami said, "It is time to make acquaintance with our 6 key holders. But first, Hastings, what impressions do you have from what we've learned?" I carefully examined. It appears that Delacroix planned some sort of confrontation with his guests. The broken key in his hand shows he was prevented from completing whatever revelation he meant. The significance of the keys themselves may signify some kind of symbolic justice or access to evidence of the betrayals he stated. "Your logic improves." Mon ami Poirot's eyes glowed with joy. "Come and meet these 6 individuals whose names are inscribed on keys of mystery. I have the definite sensation that before this case concludes, we will discover that the past and present are more intimately intertwined than appearances suggest." The fog had gathered outside the Chateau's diamond-painted windows, and as we followed Inspector Beaumont toward the Grand Salon, I couldn't shake the impression that we were traveling further into a web of secrets that reached far beyond the events of this fateful weekend. Chapter 2, The Weekend. That never was. The Grand Salon of Ebon Court proved to be a magnificent chamber, speaking clearly of the Delacroix family's lengthy fortune. Persian rugs blanketed polished oak floors, while images of stern-faced forefathers looked down from gilded frames. A fire roared in the massive stone fireplace, sending swirling shadows across the assembled group who had risen at our entry with varied degrees of serenity. 6 people awaited us, their faces carrying that specific expression of controlled fear that I had learnt to know in persons who find themselves unexpectedly engaged in matters of violent death. Inspector Beaumont delivered the introductions with the mechanical accuracy of a man who has clearly practiced this moment. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings. May I introduce the guests of the late Monsieur Decroix? The first to go forward was a woman of approximately 55 years, her exquisite attitude unaffected by the awful circumstances. Madame Evangeline Marot possessed that special type of Parisian refinement that speaks of wealth, taste, and meticulous attention to appearance. Her black silk dress was exactly fitting for the occasion, but I saw how her gloved hands trembled almost imperceptibly when she accepted our introduction. Miss Poirot, she continued, her voice sophisticated and controlled. What a terrible business this is, poor Armand. Who could have wished him harm? That, madame, is exactly what I hope to learn. Poirot responded with a small bow. But first, if you would be so kind, what is your link to the deceased? A fleeting expression crossed her features so quickly that a less observant man might have completely missed it. We were old friends. I knew Armand many years before my marriage, and we had lately re-established our relationship. We and you came to Ebon Court at his request. Naturally, I confess his letter was very dramatic in tone. He spoke of revelations and facts that must be conveyed. She paused, her black eyes clouded with what may have been real astonishment. I can't imagine what he meant. Dr. Philippe Henel, a distinguished guy of 60 with silver hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, spoke next with the controlled cadence of someone accustomed to presenting professional comments. I served as Monsieur Decroix's family physician for nearly 20 years. He explained with hands clasped behind his back in a posture that implied tense energy firmly managed. His summons came as a surprise. I must admit, our relationship had been somewhat strained in recent months. Monsieur Poirot's eyebrows lifted with interest. How are doctor professional disputes restrained? Dr. Renard responded curtly. Armand had developed some theories about his family's past, which I considered unhealthy obsessions. He consulted other physicians for second opinions on things that were best left undisturbed before Poirot could explore this intriguing line of questioning. A strong guy with graying temples and an unmistakable military demeanor stepped forward. The family resemblance with Inspector Beaumont was immediately noticeable. Rue Beaumont, he stated with a strong handshake, retired colonel. But that mattered little since Armand and I were lads together in the same chateau. His father and mine were close friends. We maintained our friendship through the years, though. He hesitated, glancing toward his younger brother. We had grown apart recently. Recent estrangement appears to be a theme among Mercurio de Lacqua's associates. Poirot observed mildly. What caused the isolation between former pals? Colonel Beaumont's jaw stiffened. Ahand had become preoccupied with genealogy, family histories, and scandals best forgotten. He made accusations that implied improprieties in our family's past. Frankly, Monsieur Poirot, I started to wonder his mental stability. A kind voice interrupted from across the room. If I may, Miss Catherine. Ashworth proved to be a woman of around 30, simply clothed, but with intelligent hazel eyes and an aura of quiet competence. Her English accent identified her as a foreigner in this group of French nationals. I was engaged by Monsieur de Lacca 3 months ago, she continued, but not as he initially said, as a governess. There are no children at Ebon Court. Instead, he needed aid with his genealogy study, specifically the translation of English materials on his family's past. Trezin Poirot moved forward with obvious fascination. And what kind of documents, mademoiselle? Court records. Mostly legal proceedings from the 18th century. Monsieur Decroix was particularly interested in instances involving allegations of witchcraft and heresy. Rather grim reading, I'm afraid. A scholarly-looking gentleman with a pointed beard and anxious attitude cleared his throat. Professor Ryan introduced himself with a small bow as a local historian and occasional collaborator with the late Monsieur de Locke, though collaborator may be an overstatement for our recent encounters. Professor Poirot recognized your area of expertise, Breton history, particularly during the medieval and Renaissance periods. Armel consulted me extensively regarding his family's ancestry, but we had philosophical disputes concerning the interpretation of historical evidence. In what respect Professor Dufresne moved uneasily, Armand became convinced that a grave injustice had been committed against his family in the past. He asked me to help him prove some beliefs that I deemed historically flawed. When I declined to support his conclusion, he accused me of intellectual cowardice. The final member of our group had stayed mute throughout these introductions, a thin, nervous man with darting eyes and fidgety hands. When Poirot's attention was drawn to him, he began as if roused from profound concentration. "Victor Lamartine," he said, scarcely audible. "Art dealer from Paris, C. Docqua, just approached me regarding various paintings, family portraits, and similar. Some are quite valuable if authentic." "And were they authentic?" Muir said. "Yes, 17th and 18th century works have outstanding provenance, but our buyers seem to be more concerned in their historical significance than their monetary value." Poirot's eyes shone with the specific brightness I'd learnt to associate with the detection of an important clue. Historical significance in what manner? Lamartine looked anxiously around the room. Before answering, he said the paintings held evidence, visual proof. He called it of crimes perpetrated centuries ago. Frankly, I thought he was slightly insane. Inspector Beaumont went forward, reasserting his professional manner. "According to the chateau staff, C. Decroix revealed at supper last evening that he intended to reveal what he called betrayals from the past during this weekend gathering. Did any of you understand what he meant by this?" A chorus of denials met this question, though I noticed several meaningful glances exchanged among the guests. Clearly, each harbored suspicions about the other's true reasons for accepting Decroix's invitation. "May," Poirot said, rising from his chair with characteristic precision, "it seems that our host lured you here under false pretenses. This was not going to be a pleasant weekend with old pals, but rather a tribunal of sorts. Mr. Decroix plainly believed that one or more of you had committed some sin, perhaps tied to your family history, that necessitated public exposure. This observation was met with great quiet, and Dr. Riener was the first to break it. If that's the case, Monsieur Poirot, his death might not have been altogether unexpected. A man who threatens to divulge secrets should expect reprisal. Precisamente, doctor, which leads us to the issue of these weird keys." Poirot delivered the evidence bag, which included the 6 entire keys. "Each has the name of one among you. Clearly they were intended to play a role in whatever revelation Sud Decroix planned. The question that now arises is this: what did these keys unlock before anyone could respond?" The elderly butler arrived in the doorway, his countenance solemn, bearing more unwelcome news. "Forgive the interruption, Inspector," he began with formal formality, "but I thought you should know right away. The storm has worsened significantly, and the bridge connecting the chateau to the mainland has sustained damage. The local authorities report that it will be impossible until repairs can be made." A murmur of surprise went across the gathering company. Colonel Beaumont expressed what everyone was thinking. "You mean we're imprisoned here for the present?" "Yes, sir. Permitting repairs may be done by Monday, but more likely Tuesday or Wednesday." As the consequences of this revelation fell on the group, I saw Poirot's demeanor with increasing discomfort. His eyes maintained that specific shine that indicated his little gray cells were functioning at optimum efficiency. But there was something else, a shadow of disquiet that I had rarely seen in his poised features. The killer seems to have not done with the weekend's planned announcements. We were all inmates of Ebon Court, locked with a murderer whose game had only just begun. Chapter 3. The first key disappears. Dawn broke gloomy and forbidding above Ebon Court, with Atlantic mists clinging to the Charte's ancient stones like eerie fingers. I had a difficult night, disturbed by nightmares of broken keys and dark creatures gliding along moonlit hallways. The screaming wind that had pounded the chateau throughout the night had finally calmed, leaving an unsettling silence interrupted only by the distant crash of waves on the rocks below. It was probably around 7 a.m. when an urgent knock on my chamber door jolted me out of a restless sleep. I opened it and found Inspector Beaumont. His face was pallid and drawn from tiredness. "Captain Hastings," he called, his voice tight with repressed terror. "Please wake immediately. We have another death." Within minutes, Poirot and I had changed quickly and followed the inspector through the chateau's labyrinthine passageways. Our destination turned out to be the conservatory, a magnificent glass-walled chamber that in happier times must have been a wonderland of exotic plants and flowering bushes. Now, in the dreary morning light, it possessed an almost distinct atmosphere. Madame Evangeline Marot lay crumpled at the base of a marble statue of some antique goddess. Her exquisite black evening gown spread around her like the wings of a fallen raven. Her neck was stretched at an odd angle, and a little drip of blood had dried on her temple where it appeared to have struck the statue's base. "Mont," Poirot muttered, approaching the body with caution. "When was she discovered?" 20 minutes ago by the gardener," Inspector Beaumont replied. "He comes early to tend the plants, found the conservatory door standing open, and Madame Marot as you see her." I watched as my friend began his methodical examination of the scene, his green eyes missing nothing. The conservatory's tiled floor was pristine around the body, showing no signs of struggle or disturbance. Aside from the tragic figure of Madame Marot herself, everything seemed to be in perfect order. Curious Poirot whispered, squatting by the body but not touching it. "Hastings, what do you observe?" I observed the incident attentively. "It appears she fell and smashed her head on the statue. Perhaps she came here at night and stumbled in the dark." "Ah, pity me, but look more closely at the lady's evening gown. Isn't it incredibly immaculate for someone who has taken such a tumble?" He was completely right. Madame Marot's black silk gown revealed no signs of dust, dirt, or disarray beyond what the fall itself may have caused. Her hair, though disheveled, kept much of its exquisite arrangement, and her pearls remained unbroken around her throat. Furthermore, Poirot continued rising with that fluid elegance that belied his ears observed the position of the body. If Madame had fallen normally, would she not have landed differently, and these marble chips? He pointed to many little fragments of white marble scattered at the statue's base. Chips that appeared fresh had bright surfaces against the darker tiles. Inspector Beaumont scowled. "You suspect foul play, and I suspect that this death is not what it looks to be. But first, let us look over what our mysterious correspondent has left for us." It was then that I spotted the sheet of paper pinned on the conservatory's entry door. A note written in an antiquated hand that appeared to mock us with its formal script. "Pride goes before the fall, justice for Markler 1732 succor," Poirot cried, scrutinizing the paper closely. "And now, Inspector, perhaps you would be so kind as to check the black envelope in your evidence room." The inspector's face turned ashen as awareness dawned. When he returned from the study 10 minutes later, his expression confirmed our concerns. "Madame Marot's key," he announced grimly, "has vanished from the collection." Dr. Renard arrived shortly. Afterwards, summoned from his breakfast to examine the body. His professional composure appeared strained as he knelt beside his former acquaintance, and I observed that his hands shook slightly as he completed his preliminary inspection. "Broken neck," he finished after several minutes. "Death would have been instantaneous, consistent with a fall, though." He paused and looked pointedly at Poirot. "There are many abnormalities I cannot fully explain, such as the doctor's angle of impact and these contusions on her shoulders. which are quite subtle but suggestive of a well of restraint. While Dr. Renard completed his checkup, Poirot was examining the conservatory with systematic thoroughness. His eye was particularly drawn to a piece of the glass wall that provided a view of the Shadow's picture gallery. "Treacherous," he mumbled, raising his magnifying glass to study something that had captured his attention. "What is it, Poirot?" I asked. "Observe, Hastings, this window pane. Do you not perceive a slight crack here at precisely the height where someone would have been crushed against the glass? In fact, there was a hairline fracture in the glass so fine that it was almost imperceptible. Around it, I could only make out what might have been the imprint of fabric, or maybe a gloved hand." Someone was watching, Poirot concluded, however. Our inquiry was delayed by the arrival of other visitors drawn by the noise. Colonel Beaumont looked truly shaken by the news of Madame Marot's death, whereas Professor Dufresne seemed more bewildered than distressed. Miss Ashworth kept her calm composure, though I noted she avoided looking directly at the body. Victor Lamartine appeared positively ill, his uneasy disposition clearly overpowered by these awful developments. "This is intolerable," Colonel Beaumont announced. "First Arl, now poor Evangeline Inspector. Surely you don't think this was an accident?" "Currently, we are investigating all possibilities," Inspector Beaumont responded diplomatically. Professor Dufresne rushed forward with his intellectual mind, clearly working on the historical allusion in the cryptic note. Markler said in the message that 1732 relates to a very dark period in local history. There were charges of witchcraft trials and executions. Exact monk Professor Poirot interrupted. "And I feel that this historical relationship is far from coincidence. But first we must investigate the Charteau's picture gallery. I have the impression that it will prove quite informative." The portrait gallery occupied the Charteau's eastern wing, a vast chamber lined with paintings from 3 centuries of Delacroix. Family history. Elaborate gold frames held the portraits of stern patriarchs, attractive ladies, and solemn youngsters. Their painted eyes seemed to follow our movements with mute judgment. Poirot proceeded across the gallery with apparent purpose, pausing before each portrait to inspect not only the subject, but also the small brass plates that listed the sitters and dates. His pace was meticulous until he reached a particular painting near the gallery's center, a portrait of a young woman with black hair and haunting eyes, her Renaissance-style clothes suggesting wealth and rank. The plaque beneath simply said, "Marie Claire de Lacca, 1715 to 1732. "Voila," Poirot spoke gently. "Here is our Markler, and observe, if you please, the dates of her brief life." I studied the portrait with growing fascination. The young woman's face retained an air of serene dignity, but there was something in her eyes, a shadow of grief or even the knowledge of tragedy, that made the painting unusually poignant. She died at the age of 17, which I thought was unusual for that time period in Hastings, and I believe her death was neither natural nor peaceful. "Professor Dufresne, what can you tell us about this ancestor of our late host?" The historian approached the portrait with apparent hesitation. Marie Claire Decroix was undoubtedly a tragic figure. Accused of witchcraft in 1732, she died in suspicious circumstances. The records are fragmentary, but they reveal a conspiracy of adversaries who craved her possessions and sought to damage her reputation. About these foes, Poirot inquired with feigned casualness. Their names were recorded. Professor Dufresne's discomfort was clear, some of whom were local families of significance who gained from her shame and death. Before he could clarify more, a massive crash rang through the shadow, followed by yells of concern from the direction of the cooking quarters. We ran toward the sound, leaving Marie Claire's painted eyes to stare eternally from her gilded frame, carrying truths that had been hidden for 2 centuries, but were now, it seemed, demanding their dreadful accounting. Chapter 4, Shadows of the Cour. Past the incident that stopped our investigation of Mary Claire's image proved to be nothing more sinister than a kitchen maid's mishap with a tray of china. but it served to heighten the already trained nerves of everyone within Ebon Court's gates. As we returned to the painting gallery, I couldn't help but note how the remaining guests shuffled in groups as if seeking protection in numbers, their eyes darting fearfully at every shadow. The forced confinement was beginning to wear on them. The bridge remained impassable. The storm had cut the telephone lines, and the sense of isolation grew more suffocating with each passing hour. It was obvious that our unknown killer had orchestrated these circumstances with diabolic perfection. Poirot began his study of Marclaire's portrait with newfound vigor. His head tilted at the characteristic angle, indicating deep concentration. Professor Dufresne hovered nearby, his intellectual composure plainly straining after the morning's awful events. Professor Poirot said this without turning away from the art. "I believe the time has come for genuine candor. What exactly do you know about Marie Claire de Lacque's fate?" Dufresne looked awkwardly at the other visitors before speaking. "The archives are scattered. You understand that much was intentionally destroyed or lost throughout the centuries. Naturellement, what remains Marie? Claire was the youngest daughter of the de Lacque family, orphaned at the age of 15 after her parents died in a riding accident. She inherited much property, including this chateau, important seaside grounds, and a substantial dowry. By all accounts, she was intelligent, beautiful, and devoutly religious, but she was accused of witchcraft. Miss Ashworth expressed her professional interest in historical documents. The charges came from various sources," Professor Duainrain proceeded unwillingly. "Local families who had disputes with the Delco estate, a magistrate who had been denied her hand in marriage, and various others who stood to benefit from her demise." D.R. Reynard, who had been listening with obvious discomfort, wiped his throat. "Professor, these are ancient matters. Surely they have no bearing on our current difficulties." "On the contrary, Doctor," Poirot said, his gaze never leaving the painted face of Marie Claire, "I feel these historical matters are precisely the key to comprehending our contemporary situation. Professor, please continue." "The accusations were broad. Dufresne admitted she was claimed to have practiced magic, caused the collapse of local crops, and cursed her enemies with other misfortunes. All of which were nonsense, of course, but in 1732 such claims were taken seriously, and the trial Poirot inquired there was no legitimate trial. The evidence against Mary was mostly testimonial witnesses who claimed to have seen her consorting with the devil, committing abominable rituals, and so on." The magistrate, a guy named Henry Dufresne the professor, halted, flushing with embarrassment. Poirot spoke gently. "Your ancestor, Professor, my great-great-grandpa, I have always been terribly ashamed of his role in the tragedy." Colonel Beaumont scowled. "What role exactly?" Professor Drain's voice dropped to a whisper. "He accepted bribes to ensure Marie Claire's conviction. The trial was a sham. The evidence is contrived, the witnesses coached. She was sentenced to death for crimes she never committed. Yet the date on her painting I observed says she died in 1732. Surely if she were hanged for witchcraft, there would be records. This is the most terrible aspect of the whole event." Miss Ashworth consulted a leather-bound notebook she had produced, and Mrs. de la Queer showed me the documents. "Marie Claire wasn't executed. She died in prison before the sentence could be carried out, supposedly from a fever, yet the circumstances were suspicious. Poirot inquired firmly. Dr. Philip Renard was the prison physician who ministered to her. Miss Ashworth replied, reading from her notes. He reported that she died of a sudden illness, while other detainees alleged she was poisoned. The hush after this discovery was deep. Dr. Renard's face had turned pale, and his hands trembled as he grabbed the back of a neighboring chair. "My ancestor," he said hoarsely. The physician may have been unable to finish the statement. "Who may have murdered an innocent child to keep her from disclosing the conspiracy against her." Poirot finished with tragic finality. Victor Lurton, who had been silent throughout this argument, now piped up with obvious agitation. "This is lunacy. You're implying that we're all somehow linked to this old crime. Are you not Measy Lamb Martin? Poirot fixed his probing stare on the art dealer. I wonder what your inquiry into the chateau's art collection discovered regarding your own family's participation in Marliere's fate. Lamb Martin's uneasy demeanor worsened. My ancestor was only a trader who purchased some of her belongings. After her death quite legitimately. I guarantee you Benner purchased from whom one wonders and at what price. Before La Martin could react, Colonel Beaumont came forward with military directness. Monsieur Poirot, are you suggesting that this killer, who murdered Arnold and poor Evangeline, believes we are all guilty of some inherited sin? I am suggesting, Colonel, that someone has discovered the truth about Mary Cleoqua's persecution and death, and has decided that justice delayed is not justice denied. The question that now presents itself is this: who among you is descended from Mary Claire herself, and thus seeks vengeance for her wrongs? This unexpected option caused a clear shock throughout the gathering company. Each person looked curiously at the others, as if seeing them in a whole new light. Dr. Riener complained. Marliere died single and childless. Did she? Poirot walked around the portrait gallery, scrutinizing other paintings with fresh interest. Miss Ashworth, in your investigation of the records, did you encounter any allusions to Mary Claire's personal relationships? The young woman read her notes again. There were whispers of a hidden romance, but nothing was confirmed. The records were intentionally obscured on such matters, precisely because an heir to Mary Claire, even if illegitimate, would have had a claim to her fortune and a tremendous reason to expose the scheme against her. As if called by his words, the elderly butler arrived in the gallery doorway, his dignified demeanor slightly shaken by urgency. Forgive me, Inspector, he declared, but we have discovered something in the Chartas Foundation chambers that I believe you should examine right away. Inspector Beaumont looked at Poirot, who nodded definitely. Lead on, mon ami. I believe we're about to find more of Marclaire's secrets. Our descent to the foundation rooms took us along a narrow stone stairway that testified of the Chartas' medieval origins. The butler's lantern created swirling shadows over centuries-old walls, and I couldn't help but shudder as we explored deeper into the Chartas' ancient core. The chamber we entered was clearly much older than the remainder of the building, a vaulted stone room that may have served as a chapel or shrine in the past. Several wooden trunks stood along one wall, their surfaces covered in dust and cobwebs, suggesting they had remained untouched for years. We discovered this room only this morning, our butler said. The storm loosened some stones in the wall above, revealing the entrance. Jour d'Aqua had spent months looking for such a chamber, based on references in old family archives. Poirot approached the nearest chest with great care, raising its lid to uncover a collection of personal things that stole my breath away. These were Mary Claire's valuables. Her jewelry, prayer book, letters tied with faded ribbon, and most notably, a detailed notebook written in her own hand, Mon Dieu. Poirot muttered and handled the journal with incredible tenderness. Marie Claire left us her testament. As he carefully opened the leather-bound volume, the brittle pages revealing secrets that had lain hidden for 2 centuries, I realized that we were about to learn the full truth of what had happened in 1850-1732, and possibly discover the identity of the killer who now stalked the corridors of Ebon Court, driven by an inherited thirst for justice that had waited nearly 300 years for its fulfillment. Chapter 5, Magistrate's Justice. The old pages of Marie Claire's journal seemed to whisper their secrets in the flickering lantern light as Poirot delicately turned each delicate leaf. The young woman's handwriting was elegant despite the obvious emotion with which many passages were penned, and her words painted a vivid picture of the conspiracy that had destroyed her life. Listen to this, May, Poirot said reverently as he read aloud from an entry dated mere days before Mary Claire's death. They feel they have silenced me with their bogus accusations and purchased witnesses. However, I have concealed the truth where it cannot be destroyed. Let people who come after know that Redrain accepted gold to distort justice. Phipe Reener consented to declare me insane to secure my punishment, and Jehu Professor Duwainra began aggressively. Geez, Beau, it is impossible. My study revealed no Beaumont family participation in the issue. Poirot continued reading that Jules Beaumont, captain of the local militia, offered false testimony about my alleged midnight rites in exchange for grants of my coastal properties. Colonel Beaumont's face had become hard with astonishment. My ancestor was a military man, but I had no awareness of any relation to the Markler firm. The journal reveals much. Poirot noticed, flipping another page with infinite care. However, we must not linger on these disclosures now. Time, I fear, is not our ally. Indeed, the mood within the chateau had gotten increasingly uncomfortable as the day drew on. The remaining guests rolled around with obvious nervous tension, starting at every sound and scrutinizing each other with undisguised distrust. The fact that they were perhaps descended from Markler's persecutors had cast a shadow over the entire firm that no amount of reasonable conversation could erase. Inspector Beaumont caught us at the chateau's library around 4 p.m., where Poirot was painstakingly reviewing Professor Dufresne's research materials. The inspector's face showed an expression of profound anxiety that quickly attracted our attention. "Monsieur Poirot," he announced, "we cannot locate Professor Drain. He hasn't been seen since lunchtime, and his room appears to be empty." "Sacre!" Poirot up immediately from his chair. "How long has it been since he was last observed?" "Approximately 3 hours. The attendants assumed he was resting in his chamber. But when the maid went to turn down his bed, she discovered the room vacant." We hurried along the chateau's halls with increasing hurry, yelling the professor's name, and searched each apartment meticulously. Miss Ashworth suggested we investigate the library more thoroughly, noting that Dufresne had expressed special interest in certain historical manuscripts housed there. The library of Ebon Court was a beautiful chamber-lined Florida, ceiling with leather-bound volumes, many of which appeared to date back several centuries. Tall windows offered enough natural light throughout the day, and several reading tables were dispersed throughout the space, each fitted with appropriate lamps for scholarly work. We discovered Professor Dufresne slumped over one of these tables, his head resting on an open manuscript whose vellum pages were smeared with what appeared to be spilled tea. His spectacles had fallen off his face and were broken on the floor by his chair. "Mont," Poirot muttered, approaching the inert form with customary delicacy. "Dr. Renard, if you please." Dr. Renard's examination was rapid but thorough, with his professional serenity reasserting itself despite the sad circumstances. "Dead for some time," he concluded bitterly. "Perhaps 2 hours or more." The symptoms. He halted and looked meaningfully at Poirot. "They are consistent with the same toxin which killed Al Poison again," Inspector Beaumont mumbled. "But how the professor took no refreshment since lunchtime and dined with the others?" Poirot was inspecting the book over which Dufresne had been found, his magnifying lens exposing details undetectable to the naked eye. "Observe, Hastings, the stains upon these pages. What appears to be tea is actually something more sinister." Indeed, under Poirot's lens, the stains revealed a unique crystalline residue that reflected light with an almost metallic brilliance. "The poison was applied on the manuscript itself," Poirot ended. "The toxin was absorbed through the professor's skin as he handled the pages during his research." "Diabolical," Colonel Beaumont cried. "But who knew he would examine this specific document?" Before anyone could respond, Miss Ashworth directed our attention to a sheet of paper that had been put clearly upon a nearby reading stand. The now familiar ancient lettering read, "The corrupt judge meets his judgment. Justice for Markler, 1732. Professor Dufresne's key." Inspector Beaumont stated coldly, scrutinizing the black envelope. "Gone like the others." As Dr. Renard finished his inspection of the body, I spotted Poirot scrutinizing the manuscript that had been the instrument of death. "What is this manuscript exactly?" I inquired. "A history of local ecclesiastical events from the early 18th century," Poirot replied thoughtfully. "But see here. Someone has recently written annotations in the margins, cross-referencing specific texts with recent genealogy research. Indeed, penciled notes in what seemed to be Professor Dufresne's handwriting matched some Latin names to their current descendants. The professor had been tracing family lineages, recording the relationships between Marclaire's persecutors and their living descendants. He was verifying the accuracy of his ancestors' roles in the plot." Miss Ashworth spotted reading over Poirot's shoulder. These notes reveal he had confirmed not only his own family's connection, but also she paused and paled as she scanned the genealogical annotations more closely. "What is it?" Mademoiselle Pouot asked angrily. "According to these documents, Professor Dufresne uncovered something surprising concerning the Delqua family line itself. There are references to a secret marriage and a concealed child." Tia Poirot's eyes glowed with unexpected realization. The professor discovered evidence of Marie Claire's heir, the descendant who is now seeking vengeance for her wrongs. Colonel Beaumont frowned. "However, if such proof existed, it would have been discovered long ago." "Not necessarily, Colonel. Consider the conditions. A young woman facing death is trying to safeguard a child from her enemy's vengeance. She would have gone to great measures to conceal the delivery and guarantee the infant's safety." As if to support this notion, Victor Laman appeared in the library doorway, flushed with joy and anxiety. The portrait made him gasp. "In the museum, someone has altered Marie Claire's painting." We went to the portrait gallery, where a horrifying discovery awaited. Marla's picture had been modified, but not harmed or disfigured. Instead, someone had meticulously wiped away years of overpainting to reveal elements that had been intentionally disguised. The young woman's figure, originally presented alone in the formal attitude typical of aristocratic portraiture, now clearly depicted her cradling an infant, a feature that had been painted over immediately after the original work was done. Voila Poirot spoke gently. "Marie Claire was not childless, as history records. She gave birth, and someone went to tremendous lengths to conceal this news from her adversaries. The implications were astounding. A direct descendant of Marie Claire Decaux walked among us, possibly among the chateau's servants, armed with documentary proof of the scheme that had destroyed their ancestor and driven by a hunger for justice that had waited 3 centuries for satisfaction." As the shadows extended in the portrait gallery and Mary Sile's painted eyes appeared to watch us with fresh intensity, I realized that our killer's deliberate revenge was far from complete. 3 keys had disappeared. 3 descendants of the original conspirators lay dead, while the remaining guests, Dr. Renard, Colonel Beaumont, Miss Ashworth, and Victor Lamartin, faced the dreadful certainty that one of them would be the next to face Mary Cla's long-awaited justice. Chapter 6: The Art of Deception. The finding of Marie Claire's concealed kid had shed a totally new light on our investigation, and I could tell from Poirot's expression that his little gray cells were functioning at full capacity. After the terrible news about the image, the remaining guests retreated to the salon, their expressions troubled by the realization that they are being relentlessly persecuted. Night had descended over Ebon Court with extraordinary malevolence. The Atlantic winds howled about the chateau's ancient stones, like the voices of the enraged dead. The electricity had flickered periodically throughout the evening, contributing to the Gothic ambience that appeared to pervade every aspect of the structure. Victor Lamarine failed to show for supper about 9 o'clock. Initially, his absence caused little anxiety. The art dealer's uneasy tendency had forced him to skip several meals since the murders began. However, when Miss Ashworth claimed that she had seen him descending towards the wine vendors just after tea, Inspector Beaumont ordered an immediate search. The cellars of Ebon Court were extensively carved straight into the live rock beneath the chateau's foundations. Ancient wine racks stretched into shadows that appeared to swallow our lantern light, and the air was heavy with the musty aroma of centuries-old vintages, plus something else that made my skin crawl with unexplained dread. We discovered Victor Lamartin in the darkest portion of the cells, next to a valuable picture that had been systematically destroyed. The canvas, which even in its shattered condition revealed the undeniable refinement of 18th-century French workmanship, lay in ribbons around his body as if someone had attacked it with a knife in a fury of deliberate devastation. "Want you?" Poirot muttered, crouching next to the body with his trademark care. "Doctor, if you please." Dr. Renard's examination was quick yet thorough. His hands trembled slightly as he worked. "The same poison," he concluded bitterly. "Administered approximately an hour ago, based from the rigor and the paintwork." Inspector Beaumont inquired, analyzing the shattered artwork with professional curiosity. Poirot examined the shredded canvas with his magnifying glass, fitting together bits like a mock-up jigsaw puzzle. "The signature in the lower corner is partially visible, despite the damage. M.C. Dequa, 1731, Mary Clare painted this, Miss Ashworth?" inquired, her voice full of amazement and terror. "Prime and see here." Poirot identified many shards that, when properly assembled, revealed a partial scene of the chateau's gardens. This was not simply decorative work. It looks to be a precise account of some specific event or location. Colonel Beaumont leaned closer and squinted at the ruined canvas. There appeared to be figures in the backdrop. People gathered around something. "Indeed, Colonel. I believe this painting was Mary Clare's visual testimonial evidence of her innocence, or perhaps documentation of her enemy's crime, and now it has been destroyed to avoid its revelation." As if summoned by our talk, the familiar parchment came pinned to a neighboring wine rack with the same ancient script we had grown to despise. "The thief returns what they stole. Justice for Marie Clare, 1732, Lamb Martin's Key, Inspector Beaumont." Confirmed after checking the black envelope gone with the others. Miss Ashworth consulted her notebook with apparent worry. According to Mzad Diokwa's investigation, the Lamb Martin family obtained some of Marclaire's paintings after her death, purchasing them from the estate at very low prices, stolen in effect. Poirot witnessed goods seized from a lady convicted on false charges being sold to benefit people who plotted her destruction. As we were leaving the cellars, I spotted Poirot lingering at the destroyed painting, his sharp eyes studying the wine racks with remarkable intensity. "Hastings," he murmured quietly, "observe these wine bottles. Do you detect anything peculiar?" I surveyed the ancient racks and saw nothing but dust-covered bottles placed in the typical fashion. They appear pretty natural. "Poirot, look. Closer behind this rack of 1847 Bordeaux. Did you notice a draft?" There was a little movement of air that suggested a hidden corridor or room beyond the visible cellar walls. Poirot's inquiry uncovered a portion of stone that moved when pressed, revealing a short tube that vanished into darkness. Soccer screamed. "Our killer has been using secret passages to move around the chateau undetected. This explains how the murders were carried out with such precision and secrecy. The tunnel connected the cellars to various parts of the chateau via a network of corridors that must have dated back to the building's medieval time. As we explored with our lanterns, we learned that these hidden paths offered access to practically every room in the building, including the conservatory where Madame Marot had died and the library where Professor Dufresne had met his end. The killer is intimately aware of the chateau's secrets." Poirot watched as we emerged from our subterranean expedition. This shows either long-term living here or thorough research into the building's history and construction. Returning to the main levels, we found the remaining guests huddled in the salon like survivors of a shipwreck. Dr. Renard sat firmly in a high-backed chair, his medical bag clasped protectively on his lap. Colonel Beaumont paced before the hearth with military precision, while Miss Ashworth kept her cool despite the obvious strain on her pale face. 4 dead, Colonel Beaumont declared solemnly as we entered. All Evangeline the professor, and now poor Lamartine. Inspector, surely you cannot believe these deaths are coincidental. Certainly not, Colonel, Inspector Beaumont responded. We are dealing with a sophisticated killer who has meticulously planned these murders. Dr. Renard looked up from his watch, his face worn with worry and strain. The pattern is evident enough. We are being destroyed one by one and punished for the crimes of our forefathers. But how can we be held responsible for acts that occurred centuries before to our birth? Justice delayed is not justice denied, the doctor noted with deadly finality. Someone believes that the sins of the fathers must be visited upon their children. Miss Ashworth spoke calmly from her corner chair, her voice steady despite the situation. According to the texts I've translated, Marie Claire thought her persecutors would avoid earthly punishment. Perhaps she or her descendant determined to ensure that divine justice was eventually served. But which of us will be next? Dr. Renard questioned, his voice shaking with barely controlled dread. And how can we protect ourselves against an enemy who strikes from the shadows? Moved to stand in front of Marlaire's portrait, which was moved to the salon for safekeeping. The young woman's painted eyes appeared to follow his movements, and the freshly disclosed newborn in her arms served as a constant reminder that somewhere among us strolled her descendant, armed with centuries-old grievances and an unending need for revenge. The killer has made one crucial error, Poirot declared, his voice cutting through the stifling atmosphere like a razor. By exposing Marie Claire's kid through portrait restoration, they have given us the key to their identification. How so? Colonel Beaumont demanded. Mon ami could only have completed such exact restoration work if they had access to the original painting techniques and materials. This indicates expert knowledge of art conservation, knowledge that closely relates to our killer's occupation and identity. Before anyone could react to this surprising discovery, the lights flickered and died across the shade, throwing us into a darkness broken only by the dying embers of the fire. In that moment of stark horror, as we struggled for lights and lanterns, I heard the gentle sound of footsteps moving with deadly intent through the hallways of Ebon Court, and I knew that Mary Saleh's descendant was about to strike again. Chapter 7. The doctor's prescription. The darkness that had shrouded Ebon Court proved to be mercifully brief. Inspector Beaumont swiftly identified the electrical switches that had been purposely thrown, and light was restored to the castle within minutes. However, those few moments of mindless panic were sufficient for our killer to claim another victim. As we learned when Dr. Renard did not respond to our calls from the salon, his room, Colonel Beaumont stated bitterly. He considered retiring early, saying his nerves couldn't take much more of this horror. We discovered Dr. Renard's chamber. Door locked from within, which filled us all with dread given the pattern of fatalities we had witnessed. Inspector Beaumont's constant banging yielded no response, and we were eventually forced to smash down the thick oak door to gain admission. The scene that met us was one of obvious tragedy with questionable circumstances. Dr. Renard rested calmly on his bed, fully dressed, his medical bag open beside him, an empty vial gripped in his lifeless hand. A sheet of hotel stationery lay on the knitstand, filled in handwriting that appeared to be a confession. "Montour," Poirot muttered, approaching the body with his normal caution. However, Miss Ashworth, who had maintained her cool throughout the evening's horrors, took up the confession with quivering fingers. "He admits to all of the murders," she read aloud. "He says he couldn't bear the embarrassment after discovering his ancestors' role in Mary Claire's death. Claims he poisoned the others to prevent exposure of the conspiracy, then killed himself in regret. How convenient," Colonel Beaumont observed with deep mistrust. "The guilty party eliminates himself and gives us a neat explanation for the entire horror." Poirot examined the alleged suicide scene with considerable care, his magnifying glass showing features undetectable to casual observation. "Hastings, what do you make of the doctor's position?" "I investigated the body attentively. Dr. Renard laid with his arms at his sides, the empty poison vial laying in his right palm in a manner that appeared almost ceremonial. His face wore an appearance of tranquil relaxation, which seemed contradictory with the violent death of the other victims. Despite having just ingested a deadly dose of poison, he appears amazingly composed. I noticed Precisimo, and kindly look at the handwriting of this confession. Poirot put the document up to the light, inspecting it through his glasses. What strikes you as odd? I matched the confession to prescriptions I had seen Dr. Renard make during his evaluation of the prior victims. The handwriting is consistent, if perhaps somewhat more labored than normal. Exact more, but consider the ink. Mon ami, do you not perceive changes in its consistency and color? Indeed, under closer scrutiny, the confession appeared to have been written with two distinct pens, as if created over an extended period of time, or perhaps by someone carefully mimicking the doctor's hand. Poirot proceeded moving to study Dr. Renard's medical bag. Examine what is missing from the doctor's professional equipment. The bag included the typical instruments of medical treatment, but I observed that numerous vials were missing from their customary places. More importantly, the poison that had presumably claimed Dr. Renard's life was not among the medical supplies that remained. The killer has made several errors, Poirot announced with satisfaction. First, the positioning of the body suggests the doctor was placed on the bed after death rather than dying there naturally. Second, the confession, while carefully constructed, has small variances that reveal its false character. Third, and most importantly, he proceeded to the chamber's window and examined the lock mechanism with extreme curiosity. The room was undoubtedly locked from within, but notice these scratches surrounding the keyhole. They are new, indicating that the lock was adjusted from outside the room using specialist tools. Inspector Beaumont scowled. But how could someone lock the door from the corridor? Poirot smirked with bitter delight. Using one of our strange keys, of course. The killer has used these antique keys not only as symbols of justice, but also as practical tools to stage inconceivable crimes. Miss Ashworth consulted her notebook with apparent concern. But if Dr. Renard did not write this confession, where is his key? It should still be in the black envelope if he is innocent. Inspector Beaumont instantly scrutinized his face, which confirmed our suspicions. Gone. Just like the others, Poirot explained that the killer had removed it before staging this intricate hoax. They wanted us to believe that Dr. Renard was the murderer, which would stop the investigation and allow them to escape justice. Colonel Beaumont paced the chamber with military precision, his expression stern with understanding. Then we are down to 3. You are Miss Ashworth, and he hesitated, his eyes widening with startling comprehension. Inspector, where is your brother? Jules? He should have been with us when we discovered the doctor's body. The question sent chills through the assembled company. In our attention on Dr. Renard's apparent suicide, we had failed to notice that one of our number was noticeably absent from the investigation. He complained of a headache after supper, Inspector Beaumont said, his voice tight with concern. He retired to his room before the lights turned out. We ran through the chateau's corridors to Colonel Beaumont's chamber, our footsteps echoing ominously in the old halls. The door was slightly ajar, and a cursory examination revealed that the room was empty, but not uninhabited recently. The bed displayed evidence of wear, and a glass of water stood half empty on the nightstand. He's someplace in the chateau. Poirot studied the room for signs regarding the colonel's movements, but where would he go in the middle of the night? Miss Ashworth murmured quietly from the doorway, her voice firm despite the obvious distress. Possibly he's discovered anything, evidence that could expose the killer's identity. Or possibly, Colonel Beaumont stated coldly, he's become the next target. As if called by his words, a distant sound echoed through the shadow, the crash of broken glass followed by a cry of terror. The sound looked to come from the direction of the picture gallery, and we ran toward it with rising urgency when we arrived. The gallery was vacant, but apparent traces of battle were evident. One of the old pictures had been knocked crooked, and bits of a smashed vase lay scattered across the spotless floor. Most disturbingly, drips of what appeared to be blood traced a path leading toward the underground corridors we had seen earlier. Hercule Poirot exclaimed, inspecting the blood spatters with a magnifying glass. The murderer took Colonel Jules, but not without struggle. Inspector Beaumont's face was ashen with concern for his brother's safety. We need to find him immediately. If the trend holds, the killer plans to complete their revenge tonight. Indeed, Poirot agreed, his voice harsh and determined. But first, we must comprehend the killer's ultimate goal. 4 generations of Marclaire's persecutors have died. 1 has been stolen, and 2 remain. The question that now arises is this: is our killer intending to eliminate all the descendants, or is there a more specific target? Someone whose ancestor performed the most important role in Marie Claire's destruction. Miss Ashworth looked at her study notes with obvious worry. According to the documents, while all the families engaged in the conspiracy, 1 person carries the greatest responsibility: the magistrate who accepted bribes to assure her guilt, and the physician who may have poisoned her in prison, Professor Drain and Dr. Renard. I witness both now dead, exact, indicating that our killer's prime targets have been removed and the remaining murders serve a different purpose. Perhaps to hide the genuine motivation or to ensure that no witnesses lived. To expose the truth. As we prepared to seek the secret corridors for Colonel Jules, a new evil revealed itself. The lights began to flicker once more throughout the chateau, and in the unstable illumination I could have sworn I saw a figure in white moving through the portrait gallery, a woman whose face bore an unmistakable resemblance to the painted Marclaire, who gazed down upon us with her eternal accusing eyes. The quest for Colonel Jules, and our final showdown with Marclaire's descendant, was about to begin in earnest somewhere in the labyrinthine bowels of Ebon Court, where justice had been delayed for 3 centuries and was prepared to exact its final price. Chapter 8. The 7th Key. Ebon Court's portrait gallery had never seemed more appropriate for the resolution of our riddle than it did in those final tension-filled moments. Poirot had insisted on our gathering there beneath Marclaire's restored painting, and as the last survivors assembled, Inspector Beaumont, Miss Ashworth, myself, and the chateau's ancient butler could not escape the impression that we were participants in a story that had been 3 centuries in the making. Colonel Jules had been discovered chained but unhurt in one of the secret passages. His kidnapping has only helped to heighten the drama of our killer's ultimate reveal. He sat by his brother, his military bearing slightly affected by his ordeal, but his dignity intact. Mesame Poirot began his voice with that special authority that demanded undivided attention. This weekend, we watched a sequence of murders which appeared to be the product of someone seeking retribution for previous injustices. 5 persons have died. Armand de Locke, Madame Marot, Professor Dufresne, Victor Lamartin and Dr. Renard were both descended from individuals who participated in the persecution of Marclaire. De Locke in 1732. He moved to stand exactly beneath the image where Martial's painted eyes appeared to observe our activities with eternal judgment. The perpetrator wanted us to believe that these fatalities were the result of Marclaire's descendants seeking punishment for the crimes committed against their ancestor. The historiography records the symbolic staging of each murder, the systematic destruction of the conspirators' bloodlines. All of this was intended to give the image of hereditary vengeance. Miss Ashworth squirmed uncomfortably in her chair. Are you saying that wasn't the motive? Jour could be precise. While the killer is undoubtedly tied to Marie Claire, the underlying cause was far more direct and personal than historical justice. Inspector Bolt leaned forward with obvious curiosity. Who is our murderer? Poirot's eyes shone with joy as he began his systematic explanation. The killer committed several critical blunders that betrayed their identity. First, restoring Marie Salai's portrait To expose her concealed child required expert understanding of art conservation procedures. Second, the forgery of Dr. Renard's confession, while successful, revealed small variances that betrayed the hand of someone duplicating another's writing. Third, and most importantly, the killer had intimate knowledge of the Sharda's secret. Corridors and underground chambers. He paused, allowing the implications to sink on his listeners. The most revealing clue was the broken key found in Armand Diokwa's hand. You see, that key did not belong to any of the weekend guests. It revealed the killer's true identity, which Diokwa found moments before his death. However, the key was broken. Colonel Beaumont complained. How could it reveal anything? Ah, mon ami, but I found the other half. Poirot provided a little evidence bag, holding a fragment of brass that exactly matched the piece recovered with Diokwa. It was hidden in a spot where only someone with unrestricted access to the shadow could have concealed it. He turned to confront the elderly butler. His stately composure had stayed unaltered throughout the evening's disclosures. Mouy Dubois Poirot announced, or should I say Henri de Lacamar, Claire's direct descendant through the concealed child portrait in the portrait. The butler's mask of professional civility dropped for only a moment, displaying an expression of loathing and victory that transformed his entire countenance. Claire was my great-great-grandmother, he said, his voice no longer carrying the deferential tone of a servant. She had a son before her death, my ancestor, who was sent to safety before the conspiracy could destroy him as well. And you have served the Diokwa family for how long? Poirot questioned. 40 years. Dubois responded with bitter satisfaction. 40 years of patiently planning to preserve every piece of their family history and connections. Armand never guessed that. His trusty butler was the heir to the money that should rightfully have been mine. Inspector Beaumont discovered his voice. But now, why not claim your inheritance through legal channels? Dubois laughed, a sound lacking of warmth and humor. Legal channels, the same legal system that sentenced an innocent child to death for the crime of holding what others desired. No, Inspector. This was an issue for ancient justice. You used Armand's genealogy study to find the descendants of Claire's persecutors. Miss Ashworth stated her intellectual mind was piecing together the scheme. You set up this weekend gathering to eliminate them all. Exactement. Pooh confirmed, however. Almond uncovered the truth about his butler's identity when he retrieved the seventh key, which bore not a guest's name, but the genuine name of Henri de Lacamar. He confronted Dubois and paid for this knowledge with his life. The shattered key made me realize that Diokwa was trying to divulge the killer's identity even as he died. Indeed, Hastings, but our killer had planned for such a contingency. The intricate retribution scheme offered the perfect cover for what was ultimately a crime of greed, the removal of the Diokwa line so that the true heir could take his inheritance. Dubois straightened his servant's disguise, slipping away completely. Marie Claire's blood pours in my veins, along with her property, chateau, and riches. All of it belongs to me by right of birth. The others were hurdles to be removed. Nothing more. But you made one fatal error, Poirot continued relentlessly. You assumed that justice delayed meant justice denied. In your concern with the wrongs of the past, you failed to think that today justice would finally find you. Inspector Beaumont rose from his chair, reasserting his professional demeanor. Henri Dubois, I arrest you for the murder of Armand Diokwa. Evangeline Marot, Henri Dufresne, Victor Lamartin, and Philippe Reyner. As the handcuffs clicked onto the butler's wrists, he stared up at Claire's image with twisted affection. She has her justice at last, he said. The bloodline of her adversaries has terminated, and her genuine heir claims what was always properly his. No, Poirot said slowly. Marie Claire has no justice in these murders. She was a victim of greed and conspiracy, yes, but she was also a woman of faith and compassion. She would not have wanted her descendant to become a killer in her name. The dawn was dawning over Ebon Court as Inspector Beaumont took his prisoner away. The lengthy nightmare has finally ended. The bridge to the mainland had been restored overnight, and we would soon depart this site of old secrets and modern crimes. As I packed my belongings, I discovered Poirot standing again before Marie Claire's photo, his countenance contemplative and mournful. "A tragedy," he added quietly. "The sins of the past corrupting the current generation after generation." Hungry. Dubois believed he was serving justice, but he served only his own twisted cravings for revenge and fortune. The morning sun shone through the portrait gallery's windows, lighting Marie Claire's painted face in golden light. For a moment, I could almost imagine her expression softening, as if some ancient burden had finally been lifted from her spirit. Justice, it seemed, had many faces, and not all of them were as righteous as they appeared. The 7 keys of Ebon Court had unlocked not divine retribution, but the darkest chambers of the human heart, where greed and hatred could masquerade as righteousness for centuries, waiting only for the right moment to claim their terrible price. Thank you for joining us for the 7 keys of Ebon Court. Did you suspect the butler? Read Dubois before Poirot revealed his true identity as Marciala's descendant? Tell me your opinions in the comments. If you enjoyed this journey with Hercule Poirot, please subscribe for new mysteries daily. Until next time, remember Poirot's wisdom. The truth is not always found in obvious evidence, but in patient observation of human nature, where greed and retribution can masquerade as justice. For decades. This is Jack's final sign-off from Sherlock Mysteries.